All right, so today we are on week 3 of talking about hickories. And we'll just do a rapid fire review. So last week we did mockernut hickory. Does anyone think they were able to identify a mockernut in the field as a result?
Yeah. The only other one I found is a pignut.
Yeah, and that's what we're covering today. So, so hickories in general, really quick, couple features.
Oh, you're asking this?
Yeah.
Compound leaves, opposite structure.
Alternate.
Alternate structure.
Yeah. What other tree with a compound leaf does have opposite? Ash. Yeah. So is everyone clear on what the difference is between like an alternate leaf and a compound leaf? And so on this, is this alternate or compound? I mean, alternate or simple? Opposite. There we go.
It has alternate.
So we have these leaflets that are opposite each other on the rachis, but then we have to remember that a leaflet is not a leaf. It is a subcomponent of a leaf. And so this whole thing is a leaf, and it's opposite on this, alternate on the stem. So yeah, that's how you would differentiate. Well, there are other ways, but that's how you would differentiate between especially hickory and ash. Bark, what kind of bark might you encounter?
Really tough bark?
Yeah, XY or braided, or
Peeling from the bottom.
or peeling from the bottom, which distinguishes it from,
The white oak
What-
goes from the side.
yeah. And white oak can get pretty flaky too, so it's possible to mix that up at a glance. All right, and then what about mockernut in particular? What were some of the attributes that might tip you off?
Thick
Yeah, thick nut. So about a 1/4 inch. The other one that's going to have a really thick nut is shagbark hickory. So you would need another identifier. 7 to 9, mostly 7.
Pubescent hairs on it.
Yeah, really, really pubescent, especially you're looking in particular at the petiole. So to get into the weeds just really quickly, so this is the petiole below the lowest leaflets, and then it's a rachis above that. But
Yeah, scratch and sniff. It smells like cilantro and jalapeno.
yeah, nice. I smelled a few hickories with clients this week, and they were all super impressed. All right, trying to think. Yeah, and then a really fat terminal bud on the mockernut as well. Okay, so today we're talking about it, which in my kind of anecdotal experience is probably the second most common hickory in this area. And then in terms of its distribution, it's similar to mockernut, all up and down the East Coast into southern Canada, I believe. And then into like Ohio, where the largest pignuts occur in the Ohio basin. In this area, they still can get pretty large. I looked it up just for fun to see what the state champion pignut was, and it was something like 63 inches in diameter and 145 feet tall. Yeah, really. So they are very slow growing as well. So it takes a while. You're not going to get that kind of size quickly.
So that was a state champion?
Yeah, state champion. Just based on what I read, I would assume the national champion's probably in Ohio, but I didn't look that up. And that was in Greensboro, I believe. So, but they didn't publish the location. All right. So in terms of leaflets, pignut, you're going to see mostly 5. Sometimes you'll see 3. And sometimes you'll see 7, but it's going to be mostly 5. And for the hickories, I think that the Latin is really, really useful. Does anyone happen to remember what the Latin name for mockernut was? Or what the key word? Yeah, nice. Caria tomentosa, tomentos being the word, and what does tomentos mean? Hairy, yeah, pubescent. And so with pignut hickory, the key word here is glabra. Which is glabrous. And does anyone know what glabrous?
Small. Round.
Or smooth? And so I'm going to pass around that leaf there. And so one of the key ways to differentiate this between mockernut and shagbark, which also has frequently 5 leaflets, is going to be feeling that petiole. So the lowest part of the leaf where it connects to the stem, you'll notice that's pretty smooth. And then, so I looked into the etymology of where pignut came from, and there is a few different places it could have originated from. In early colonial settlement, pignuts were oftentimes used for feed for hogs, and they're less palatable than some of the other hickories to humans. They tend to be, I think it was a little bit more bitter, but so that's one place the name came from. And then the nuts also have a bit of a snout there at the end, and then when you crack them open in cross section, the inside resembles like the end of a pig's snout. So I believe that's where one of those areas, or a combination of those things, is where the common name pignut came from. And then this is Anthony Kerrigan. He's an actor with alopecia, and so that's always what I think of when I think of like smooth, glabrous. Think of Anthony Kerrigan. So here's the nut. Yeah, Bill Hader had a show recently on HBO that just ended called Barry that he was in. So yeah. So glabrous versus tomentose, a good way to distinguish between the two if you can remember the Latin names. And then kind of further on, or following this theme of etymology, I was curious, and so I looked up the etymology of the word caria for the genus, and I didn't find a lot of information, but Wikipedia tied it back to the Greek goddess Artemis, who I guess another way to refer to her was caria, or there were a few other names, and she was turned into a tree and was considered like the mother of nut trees, or the goddess of nut trees. So there's some tie back to like Greek mythology. And then probably more meaningfully, the word hickory comes from a shortening of I'll mess up the pronunciation, Algonquian word, and I won't even attempt that. But
we have two masters in linguistics in this.
Oh yeah, all right.
Michael, why don't you say this word? Hit it.
Palco Hicora.
I usually say Poco Hicora.
Some people have a difficult time with the
But you got to do that.
Yeah, and so these nuts are developing right now. I've been seeing them on the hickory trees around my house, and so you can see that elongated, and not all of them are going to have that. So you do, as with a lot of things that pertain to characteristics on trees, you need to look at a sample size. All right, so some of the characteristics. So Craig had mentioned last week that one of the ornamental features of hickories is like the really brilliant yellow fall colors that might make them attractive to homeowners. So I had read that of all of the hickories, that Pignut hickory actually has the most brilliant and then the most persistent color into the fall of the hickories. Yeah.
I've been missing for years.
Yeah, happy to serve. Yeah, so of all of the hickories, all of them have that ornamental value of that really brilliant yellow fall foliage, but Pignut in particular is going to be a standout. And then also kind of considering other features that might be a valuable piece of information to bring to a homeowner, they have the lightest nut of all the hickories in our area. And so the least amount of disturbance to cars and roofs, I guess, would be one way of pitching it. The wildlife value, not just of Pignut hickory, and we covered this last week, but of all hickories is tremendous. They support a huge number of moths. Moths are really important pollinators, kind of one of the unsung heroes of the pollination world. And then also, there are a lot of birders in this area. New Hope Audubon is really active in this area. A lot of bird diversity. So hickories in particular, I think for a lot of clients, that's going to be a narrative that is a selling point if they're having a problem with like the nuts, or they drop their flowers. The male flowers are catkins, wind pollinated, things that dangle off the ends of the leaves or off the ends of the twigs that can create a quote unquote mess, which is a term I hate when referring to landscape trees, but one that's oftentimes used by perturbed clients. Long-lived tree. Mockernut is the longest lived of the hickories based on what I read, but Pignut is right up there at 200 to 300 years. And then one of the other really interesting facts I came across while trying to do like a little bit of a deeper dive is that hickories in general, their leaves tend to be richer in calcium. And calcium is an important secondary macronutrient in plants that support structure. And then also, interestingly, calcium, as it re-enters the soil through leaf drop, it improves soil structure. Calcium has a +2 charge, which allows it to bind to a lot of the negatively charged elements in soil, thus helping to create soil aggregates, which allows for more water retention, and it makes soils more drought tolerant. And so they improve the soil over time if we're not raking away those leaves. So another good reason to keep them in the landscape. And then pignut in particular develops like a really deep taproot. And so it's really hard to transplant. So removing a pignut hickory, you're not going to easily replace that in a landscape. Now, Craig, you might be able to let me know, do you ever see like pignut hickory being sold in nurseries? I'd imagine containerized would be more feasible, but
I can't recall it. Sometimes I'll see some like shagbark hickory.
yeah.
I can't recall it. And then they're exceptionally slow growing, so it's not going to be something with the taproot and with the slow growth. Not going to be something that nurseries are going to offer.
And then the other thing that I've come to feel really passionate about, so as arborists, we oftentimes are approaching trees based on their like mechanical properties. Homeowners are oftentimes thinking about trees from like what aesthetic value do they bring to the landscape, and what challenges may they present to their structures, you know, like leaf drop, nut drop, you know, like the quote unquote messy parts of the tree. And one of the things I feel like is oftentimes neglected is like the cultural value of these trees. We erect monuments to war generals, to important figures in our own history, but these are the trees that shaped like the early American colonies. Like hickory was a massive part of early American settlement. And then even, and not to like prioritize that history, even with indigenous peoples, a massively important part of the flora in the eastern United States, both for what the wood was used for. It's really, really strong, durable wood. One of the other names for pignut hickory is broom hickory, because it was frequently used as broom handles. It was used in wagon wheels because it was able to withstand a lot of like vibrational forces without splitting. Not to mention the nuts, being, you know, you think about, we go to a grocery store, we buy a slab of meat, we never have to like look at the cow that the meat comes from. All of our food oftentimes comes prepackaged. We don't see like where it's coming from. But without all of that, like these are the trees that would be sustaining like our families. Like these trees are enormously important for the value they provide us and for the role that they've played in both American history and then the history of the indigenous peoples that lived here, you know, before European settlement. And we'll get into walnut in a future presentation. Pecan, which is also a hickory, where it played a huge role in where people chose to live, those indigenous peoples. And so, again, recognizing one of the things that we can bring as arborists is every once in a while you might have an opening to just let people know, you know, like these aren't just trees that happen to randomly come up and like screw up your plans for your driveway. Like these are enormously difficult to replace, like cultural icons that signal a past that we've become disconnected from, that can be a huge source of enjoyment if you allow your curiosity to expand just a little bit to what's in your yard rather than just like what's in a national park. So quite a bit of cultural history, and then environmental services being provided by these trees, not just in the terms of the shade they provide, but bringing birds to our yard, which most people see as like a benefit. Especially with all of the birders in this area. So since I've moved here, I've become a huge fan of hickories. I enjoy hickories as much as I enjoy oaks at this point, and they are closely related, kind of belonging to that real regal line of trees, that order of the Fagales, which oak, beech, birch, like all of these high producing nut trees belong to, with a lot of cultural and ecological importance. And again, I covered this last time, but these are also climax species. So in terms of the trees that have been present in North Carolina within stable ecosystems for hundreds and hundreds of years, like hickories have also been a really important component of that. You know, we've already lost the American chestnut from its, the Piedmont wasn't within the range as far as I understand it, but the Appalachian Mountains were. You know, hopefully we can swing a lot of people away from, you know, removing some hickories to keep those, you know, enormously important trees as a connection to both our environmental past as well as our cultural past. So any questions on Pignut hickory? I kind of went on a little bit of a rant there, but.
Well, actually, this isn't, I probably refers more to mock or not, but what goes into, do you know what goes into harvesting hickory in terms of making it a useful food source?
Yeah, that's actually something I didn't cover, but great question. So It's not just the edible part of the nut itself that was valued. So indigenous peoples, they actually had a brew where what they would do is they would crush up like the nut, including the husk, throw it in boiling water, and it would extract this kind of like really rich, creamy oil. And they would skim it off the top and use it in the same way that we use butter. So they'd use it in cooking, and then also as a brew. And I also came across a reference to a native or an indigenous people's like myth or belief that when you crossed into the afterlife, you were offered like this hickory brew as like part of that process. So again, not just important in terms of the wood it was used, but the way in which it figured within like the larger cosmological imagination of these peoples who like really depended in part for their sustenance on these trees. And so the best time, what I'm hoping to do is come this fall, I would really like to provide that cultural experience of hickories. I'm hoping to do something with nuts. You harvest them after they've lost like the green part of the nut when they're on the ground in the like mid to late fall, I believe. That's the best time to harvest them, when they're at their most palatable. And it'd be a lot of fun to try them like both cooked and then potentially to try this like nut brew.
I know a property where we could get a lot.
Oh yeah, right on. Yeah. And you're fighting for the squirrels, and I had covered this on last week's presentation as well, but it's not just squirrels. There are a few birds that eat the nuts, foxes, everything up to the size of like a bear. A lot of animals that are foraging these nuts. So enormously, enormously important and very, very difficult to replace. People should feel privileged to have these mature trees on their property, and it would behoove us to attempt to like sway them into keeping them where possible.
Tim, I think you're in a good case for, you convinced me that the pignut is the hickory to have because of the extended fall foliage, the size of the like a lighter nut.
Yeah.
Is there any other major detractors of being around vehicles and driveways? It seems like this would be the one if people were to keep one.
Yeah, this would be the one if people were going to keep one. Well, I mean, I think they're all. These are like slight differences that I might like throw out there to really try to, if I think someone's like close to being swayed.
Yeah.
And by the way, it also has like the lightest nut. But hopefully there could be other solutions for the mocker nut as well, or the shagbark, which also has a large nut. But I think, a driveway is this kind of like temporary thing, but these trees that take hundreds of years. Oh, and the other interesting thing is, to your point, Michael, it takes 30 years for a tree to start producing a reliable nut crop. Like these trees do not like do anything quickly. Think of the Ents from Lord of the Rings. Yeah, and so should value the contributions they make both to us culturally, historically, and then environmentally. And then think of Anthony Kerrigan. I'm sure he would be flattered to be associated.
Sam, thank you, man.
Yeah.